Welcome to the DevOps Online Summit Coaching. Gunjan is joining us. I know you did your talk on scaling DevOps in the enterprise, but I'm sure you talk about a lot of different things. If you just want to do a little level set so everyone knows kind of maybe your background. And
yeah, absolutely. So once again, thank you so much for Tom and Mark for having me during the summit. As Tom said, we did a talk. The focus of that talk actually was people, process, and tech alignment with focus on actually the alignment, right? So I have 15 years of experience as a digital transformation, and these days I focus more on the innovation aspect of that with more strategy, governance, planning pieces. So shifting my career left, just like you do in DevOps and DevSecops a little bit, as they say. So I come from that deep technical work. If you remember 15 years ago, microservices used to be a thing. People used to build ESBs back in the day, right? And hook up all kinds of supply chains and things like that to it. So that's my background. And then I did my MBA at Schulich, which is a very Canadian thing. Sometimes people don't even know what that is outside of Canada. But it was a great opportunity to merge together that business mindset with the technology mindset. So where I add value now is at the C-level and boards, especially during the post-pandemic world. A lot of the risks that used to exist on these transformations that you could sometimes ignore to the nth degree because the impact of them just wasn't as great as it is now. It's more working towards leadership to guide them and say, okay, here's how you can be more process minded. These are the things you can think about now as opposed to later when there are issues. So that's the mindset that I bring. A lot of my clients are in Canada. Some of them are in US as well. And, it's no surprise that some of them just don't have that level of maturity with DevOps. And some of them that did are actually moving more towards DevSecops. And we talked a little bit about that during the talk with Mark as well, because of security is such a big factor right now, right? Everybody's remote. How do you make things more secure? BYOD is just rampant now. So how are you going to make sure that things stay aligned? So I'm not sure, Tom, if this particular conversation starts off with any particular questions, or is it sort of just a free?
Yeah, just really kind of if Emmanuel or David want to chime in,
absolutely.
feel free to ask questions. I know David,
Yeah.
I think we've been on a few conversations together. I know Emmanuel, you were on, I think was it last week or 2 weeks ago we talked?
It was 2 weeks ago, yeah.
Yeah, so I would love to hear your own experience with DevSecOps and bridging together those multiple perspectives, right? Because DevSecOps is all about breaking down those silos.
Manuel, you want to go first?
Oh, go ahead, Dave.
Okay.
I'll defer to you.
So as it turns out, my employer is a cybersecurity company, so we haven't had too much of a barrier to break down.
Right.
We sort of we all understand why. I think when the rubber meets the road in terms of prioritizing, it's like, well, do we need to develop a new feature or do we invest in a security improvement for an existing one? And there, we've used penetration testing, we've used, of course, risk scoring and everything like that. So I think in terms of DevSecOps, that part of it, I think I have some experience with being mature about. But for me, the question you were talking also about how you work at the C-suite, you work at the highest levels of the company, and as the company grows and as the company scales, I'm curious, what's your pitch? What have you found to be effective when it comes to making the case for adding what's perceived as more process or more documentation? This doesn't seem agile, and yet as an organization grows, we can't rely on the same communication channels that we did when we were maybe 1/10 of our size.
So I'll tell you what, I left IBM probably about 7 years ago, and the biggest surprise of my life, because that umbrella, the protection thing just kind of goes away, right? When you leave a big organization. C-suite level, especially even VP levels, would come to me and say, I couldn't care less about your processes. Just tell me task level stuff and tell me the results. So you see a little bit of gap there, right? And that's still very rampant. Even though people realize that there's need for that process, sometimes it depends on how much pain have they already felt, if that makes sense. So that's my most common takeaway from C-level conversations, to continue to hit KPIs. And sometimes they don't have those KPIs or even OKRs, whatever you want to call them, right? Different places will use different acronyms to describe success metrics. But what is a business success metric for them that they're being measured against? Because sometimes it's not very obvious. And quite frankly, sometimes people don't even understand DevOps or DevSecops at that level because it sounds like a very, very techie thing. So if you're talking to somebody who's not a CTO or not a CIO, chances are their eyes will just glaze over, right? So partially the challenge is you have to actually work with the technology team first to bridge that gap between their business case, which is written in IT speak sometimes, and then talk to somebody on the business side and go, what are the use cases that are hurting right now? Or sometimes data privacy and security might be those concerns. Oh, hi. Sorry, I'm going to mispronounce your name for sure.
Fee.
Fee. Perfect. Thank you. Phew. But yeah, so from that point of view, it's more bridging that conversation. And then it's a matter of which industry they're in and which template fits for that conversation, which is the easiest part of that discussion. So finding out which use cases they are after, who's the end customer of those use cases. That could be someone inside the company or could be someone outside the company, and what data, because I'm a very data oriented person. What data are those people watching? What could I plug myself into as a criteria so that if anything changes in those needs, then I can adjust my business case right away or rebaseline it in some fashion. As odd as that may sound, why would you rebaseline a business case? But during pandemic, that's what you need to do. And then executives, again, unfortunately, they're not going to want to hear what you're doing at the DevOps level, right? In terms of processes, they might care about, for example, CI/CD is implemented for X. Okay, yeah, that's good. I just need to understand at a higher level what that means in the context of business. But your technical teams will obviously care a lot more about that as that cascades down, right? Because it really changes their roles and their lives. Like developers are becoming more QAs, so on and so forth. Their roles are also shifting a little bit, right? I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, and I do have a follow-up. So what's been your observations about the reaction to either cybersecurity or just security in general, given the knowledge gap? So hey, if I'm a CFO and if I've been focusing on finance, sure, I can read in the Wall Street Journal this company's been hacked, but what does that person need then to feel confident that they're not going to go to jail, they're not going to lose their job because they get hacked?
Yeah, and this is where a two-part answer, right? I believe your company is also consulting, right? Either offering products or providing services.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest challenge that I have as a consultant is two-part. First of all, like I said, what metrics are they already watching? How much do they already know? But even then, sometimes there's a pitfall because what else is happening in this organization and how are those things colliding? Because not every company has a luxury of having someone who's seen many, many different digital transformations or innovation, right? So oftentimes they're doing it for the first time and they're hitting those walls as if it's happening to them for the first time, because it is, because they don't have that oversight that you might have, right? And sometimes even describing risks to them doesn't go very far because sometimes they might be one of those companies that has to hit the iceberg before they learn the lesson. So you have to gauge some of these things. And in the remote world, personally, I find it a little bit of a challenge to do so because everything is a meeting that has an agenda. So how can I maneuver conversations to get the stuff that I can't just ask? Like, what would it look like as a cybersecurity consultant for me to come in and go, can you talk to me about Agile? Well, why do you care? Why do you care if I have an Agile journey or not? Well, I do care because that will tell me where you are in that maturity model and what I can talk to you about, and whether your teams are ready for some more mature features or whether I should be marketing you some basic level stuff, even though you're asking me, like as data. A lot of my work is data at this moment. So people ask about AI, but you don't even have basic data governance in place, right? So that's a moot conversation now. And in your world, they may be asking for pen tests, but then everything else around their application is just broken. They don't even have basic firewalls. What's the point? It's all going to fail anyway. Right? So maybe let's have a different conversation.
Yeah, understand that baseline. And
yeah, the part of the challenge is who do you educate on what pieces? And that's where influence is a keyword for me, right? I wouldn't just go and have a conversation and put all my eggs around selling them something in just one basket with one person. So even if I'm working with, let's say, the CIO, I would still want to talk to the CMO, the chief marketing officer, because they have an influence on what use cases they look at. Because they are the ones that saying, here are the business cases in retail predominantly, right? CMOs have a lot of power there right now. CDOs have a lot of power there right now. CISOs have tons of power right now. However, they're at the mercy of these two other people because they're upstream to them. So you kind of have to work out what's their chain of command a little bit. And that's easier said than done. But for me, that goes a really long way, especially if you're looking for a long-term relationship with them, which you do need, and especially in services. So selling them one service today for 3 months isn't going to cut it. Right?
Great, thank you.
Right.
Manuel, did you have a question?
Not really, but I was just curious when you mentioned about sometimes the C-suite, their interest is much more cutting to the chase, but you are trying to first understand what they already have as far as governance in place to be able to offer them the services that you can tailor to their needs. But what has been your more or less experience as far as the resistance level, the pushback?
Yeah.
If when you are faced in these situations, and I'm sure the people that are much more at the lower level can see the value in perhaps being able to for lack of a better word, be able to see that they utilize some of the security services that are available, but the higher suites that may make the decisions might not also be so much enthused about seeing that happen. So, what's your experience, and how do you maneuver in such instances?
It's quite interesting, Emmanuel. So pre-COVID, I would have completely agreed with you. However, post-COVID, I've noticed something exact opposite of what you just said. Because the task level or mid-management has now seen the pain of going remote without having those tools, and they've also seen risks become issues. They've actually lived it firsthand in most large organizations, right? Medium to large. It's one of those things at C level as well. Microsoft, Google, some of these companies are really pushing and educating C-suite on what are the risks of some of these things. So their education level, while it's not at the same level as someone who's actually using the tool set, obviously, right? But they're starting to now understand what could happen to their organization if they don't do it. Right? Because I think it was Satya Nadella who said, oh, the world is moving really fast right now. We've just seen in 3 or 4 months, we've seen the digital transformation worth 2 years. I don't know if I'm describing this properly, but something to the effect of pre-COVID, it took 2 years to implement and use this type of technology. And now we've done it in 3 or 4 months. And if you don't do it, you'll be left behind. And your customers are all online. They won't come to your stores anymore. So that's at the back of their mind. So there's actually the challenges when the two sides are designing their objectives and their tasks and their metrics, whatever you want to call them. Are they actually meeting in the middle, or is this something like this is happening, right? So oftentimes, especially on the DevOps programs, I find that because there's that lack of technology knowledge that you said at the C level, sometimes this does happen because the board and C level and even VP level folks might think money is going towards one particular use case, but it's like a game of telephone. By the time you get the first pilot, well, that's not really what I was looking for. And that's happening a lot, especially with DevSecops right now, because it's so complicated to understand and explain. So there's not a lot of people out there that can speak both business and tech knowledge. And that's where, to be frank with you, I think there's a lot of room for consulting companies that offer services to grow a practice in that area to say, look, I'm bringing a business expert, but I'm also bringing a tech expert. And these two people know how to align themselves. So these two people can work with your side of the organization. And these two people can also go up and down the chain in your organization to align certain conversations in a certain way. Right? So those rolling dashboards, if you will, right? And for me, that's where data and DevSecOps kind of intersect, right? These deep technical conversations because DevSecops is so much more about tools, right? More tools than Agile, more tools than anything else, really. But then it's also about people and processes, and that's where data can help you. So how are the roles changing? Are people resisting those roles, and what are the metrics that you're watching to track their progress and performance, right, across that chain? Because keep in mind, just like any other digital transformation, you can't just create one success metric and just measure it until the end of time, right? You'll go through these ups and downs and different stages in your program,
Right.
much like anything else, right? And you need to have different metrics and evolving metrics throughout those stages. So at some point, you'll put more emphasis on tools. Other times, you'll put more emphasis on people's changing roles, and you'll need more change management. And when you bring in change management, more involvement from leadership as well. And at those times, leadership will need to understand how many tool sets are involved.
Makes
Yeah.
sense.
So you mentioned about tool, right? But sometimes tools are just luxury, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Only big company can afford tool, especially security tool, right?
Yeah.
So I have experience with both like small, very small startup size of a company, and then with like big companies,
Mhm.
right? And big company because of the image and then the legal issue, right? So they always put focus on security, and hence they're willing to pay for tool around securities. But like startup, right? That's the least thing that they worry about, right? So how do I be able to convince, startup type of company to like, hey, this
Yeah.
tool is really cool and will help us, but that certainly not on their agenda, right? Because they have only like a very fixed budget to
Yeah.
spend on.
So I'll tell you something. So first, I should caveat this by saying that those 15 years of experience that I mentioned at the start of this call, most of them are with medium to large companies. But for the last year and a half, I've been doing a lot of work with startups in Toronto area.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one thing that I've realized over that year and a half, having had some conversations, not in-depth, deep working relationships, but some conversations with US companies, that I've noticed there's a regional difference in startups, the way that they think and the way that they operate, right? So I'll give you the answer from a Toronto company perspective, and somebody else here who has experience with US startups will have to jump in and correct me, and compare and contrast. So from at least the Toronto/Canadian ecosystem point of view, companies are not forward looking unless it's their own product. So operations is the last thing on their mind, right?
Yep.
Unless they're hitting that growth cusp. So I'm talking about early stage companies. I'm talking about ones that are just thinking about growing but are not quite there yet. So DevOps and things like that, they may have heard of it, but they'll just waste your time. They'll give you the meeting, but quite frankly, you're not going to make a sale, because as you said, they first of all don't have money, and second of all, you're not the top of mind of thing for them, especially during COVID, right? Because their goal right now is to get as much money as possible undiluted from the system, like I was describing earlier, right? The ripen type of thing. All of their business is coming from small startups and consulting companies like me, who are small boutique companies. So one thing that would be in your favor, though, is to plug yourself into that ecosystem and keep on top of who has hit, I don't know, you have to come up with a metric here now, maybe a $2 million revenue mark, $5 million revenue mark. And if you can get insight into who their customers are, because as soon as they are now serving bigger companies, now you can hit them with a risk, because now they have to be PCI compliant and all kinds of things kick in, right? So now you can go in and say, look, your customers are now asking for this. You have no choice but to do this, but also show them savings and risk both together, right? So if you do DevOps today,
I'm coming from the technical side, not the sales side, right? So
okay, got it.
this is how do I sell your security tool to my CTO?
Right. So that's where you will have to use risk, right? That's the only answer.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. But if your tool can in some way though accelerate their product roadmap, So again, I don't know if you can get access through their technology roadmap, which is again under lock and key for startups, right? It's a very tall order to say, hey, can you share your technology tools roadmap with me? But if you know that they will require security features there that they're building in house, that's when you can go and try to be a partner instead of a vendor for them. And I know that's a door that's easily propped open, especially on the technology side, because now they know that I can do this in 2 days as opposed to for 2 months sit there and create a feature to do this myself. Because startups think they have to do everything themselves, right?
Right.
So when a great partnership comes through and it's lucrative and you're not asking them to pay day one, all those things mean something to them.
Yep.
So
Got it.
again, the caveat being this is Toronto and Canadian ecosystem, US may be a little bit different. Right?
Yep. Thanks.
So what's the number one problem that you guys are seeing at your clients for DevOps and DevSecops right now?
Well, I think for us, you mentioned it best. So I would say with our current size, being catering to startups also and small to just about medium-sized companies, I think security is maybe the need for hardening might not be as stringent as maybe a well-established and global companies. But for the most part, some of the guidelines is the CIS, benchmark, use that as the guidelines in helping with the hardening and any other securities that we might need to. So for other, for Finn and then David, I'm not sure maybe what's been your experience?
Did you want to go? Or?
I think he's not.
Yeah. I think the sort of the on the ground evolution that we're having is taking engineers who are very accustomed to like I build it and then the customer operates because it's on-premise software, and now it's like, well, no, you build it and we've got to operate it.
Mm-hmm.
And so then understanding really what it takes to diagnose problems in real time, right? We've been afforded this opportunity, but do we know how to take advantage of it? And realizing that as you are making technical decisions, as you are understanding, how long it will take to deliver a feature, realizing that operability is important. So being able to monitor and being able to roll back changes quickly, all that kind of stuff. And so I think that for us, that and like, gosh, there's so many different tools and new things to use. I've got a bingo card with all the Helm and Kubernetes and Docker, and oh my gosh, that is a drinking game. Well, it used to be a drinking game, and then it went to be a bingo card because it's a little too much. But anyway, those are like some of the things that we're learning right now.
Oh, that's interesting.
I agree with you, David. So that's sort of linked into the biggest challenge I have on my organization is the support from the upper management, right?
Mm-hmm.
From the ground up for the culture of DevOps, right? So
see, that's the thing. I hate that term, if I'm being honest, like culture of DevOps, because no one really, it's like air, right? You know that it's there and you know it's needed, but no one can actually really describe what it looks and feels like. And the part of the challenge is who owns the culture of DevOps in an organization, right? Because there's no one accountable party. Like same problem happened with data and data ops if you think about it, but then we've got this magical pixie called CDO, right? Chief Data Officer. It's not like we have a chief DevOps officer or something like that. So ultimately it starts and stops with CIO, but do they always even agree that it starts and stops with them? And are they the best person sometimes to even drive that change? Because it's, how do you explain this to business, right? Because they might be the sponsor. The business is the one that's providing funds for it. So there's all kinds of gaps in that DevOps conversation, as you pointed out. There's some at the tools level, right? How do you identify the best tool and how do you compare them? Because every vendor is coming to you and pushing their tool. Then there's the roles conversations. Then there are conversations around culture. Then there's conversations around leadership. Business case itself is quite complicated. So in my opinion, that's what makes what people call the DevOps or DevSecops transformation the most complicated of all, right? And on top of that, a lot of organizations, at least in Canada, are only just now going agile. How do you do DevOps and DevSecops without having some of those basic agile principles? I don't know. You just can't, right?
Gunjan, thank you so much for spending a little extra time with us. You really did a good job of answering everybody's questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you for organizing this time. I really enjoyed it.
You bet.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
very
you, everyone.
much.
And we'll see you guys later. I think we have another call tomorrow. So hopefully you guys can join us.
Wonderful.
Thanks,
Enjoy. Stay safe.
Tom.
Take care.
Stay safe,
Bye.
everyone.